to welcome up Jan Alexander, who, from her biography, is rather interesting. Rejected formal education, then came to Ireland in 1978, set up an environmental organisation based around tree planting and cultivation called CRAN, and with her husband now manages, is it 28 acres? 26 acres of native Irish landscape and forest. I was just saying earlier, for those of you who are interested, there's a really, really good book by a man called Owen Dalton called A Wild Atlantic Rainforest. And what Jan is going to talk with us today is very much in that sense of how can we connect with nature in a time of, take your pick, cost of living, cost of profiteering, cost of capitalism crisis that we're now going through. And I'm really delighted to invite Jan here today, because I do think it's part of the mission of the Centre for Sustainability is to extend our remit beyond the usual suspects in terms of the academy, fellow academics, although we do that, or policymakers. It's amazing how this university, like most universities, is set up and more comfortable with inviting in business people, inviting in policymakers and politicians, and we're less welcoming to feral intellectuals. We're less welcoming to people who come in with their hands literally dirty from the dirt under their fingernails of actually doing good stuff to save the planet, and whereby people like me talk about doing it, actually you that is doing hard work. So you're very welcome here, Jan. I'm looking forward to listening to your talk. So those here and online, please give Jan a warm welcome.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you. The conversation we had back in February, I asked John for some of his time to have a discussion, and he gave it so generously and resulted in this coming here today, which caused me to really look more deeply at work and make of it more than what I had when I contacted you. And of course to Callum for backing up with the software, because I'm a disaster with tech. And I'd like to welcome those online and those here, and thank you for giving up 2 hours of your time in your one wild and precious life to look at this book. Firstly, I want you to know that I'm not here to sell you anything, nor to try to persuade you to adopt my worldview, nor to educate you. I am not promoting a book, trying to boost my online presence, nor am I looking for a job as a lecturer at Queen's. There are no points to be proved here, or opinions to defend. None of what follows is correct, nor is it incorrect. It's just what I see. So dividing things up into either this or that, true or false, good or bad, means we take our eye off the ball, and it's all worth keeping our eye on. So please relax and listen without intensity, with a mind that doesn't have to grasp hold of anything and doesn't need to agree or oppose what is being presented. I want to start off by 2 little stories. Just a few days ago, this will make you city dwellers so jealous, but it was a beautiful morning, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for a dip in the lake. The lake is about 20 or 30 meters. So I went down to the lake, down the little woodland path, down to the lake edge, and just before the lake edge, I heard this little minute kind of whirring sound. I can't imitate it. High-pitched kind of whirring sound, which is familiar to me. So I just walked on a few steps and then just stood like a stone and listened. And sure enough, then I heard a little flurry of wings going through the brambles. And this little sound immediately stopped. And I laughed my head off because I could see, without seeing with my eye, the little wren coming in to chastise the nest. Shh, for God's sake, it's a human. Shut up. Because I thought when I heard the sound, I always thought, here's Mum with more food. And that's what happened. So in that little story, I had a feeling of great joy. and an immense gratitude for whatever way I've been led that allowed that little patch of brambles, the messiness of our woodland, to be there. Because without that, there'd be no little bird. You know, people think woodland, great, there's trees. No, no, no. That's just a small part of the story. And the part that mainly gets tidied away by our civilization is the mess. So the brambles are an invaluable help to little creatures like that, that bring joy to our hearts. And I was thinking, why do birds make us so joyful? And straight away I pictured academics running off to try and find out, you know, why that happens in scientific reasons. And I just thought how the activity of wondering expands everything, but it has no conclusion. It doesn't have anything to poke around at. I didn't feel obliged to go through a nest and disturb everyone. So in that one little encounter, not even a visual encounter, all of those lessons came up from the land and met me without going outside my door, basically. So the same day, that evening, I worked. I've been working on this, which meant I was inside more. So I felt kind of tired, and I thought, I know, I'll get the sign. I'll go out and sign a little bit of ground in Ponyfield. Ponies they make weeds for plants because they only eat grass. So there was a lot of grass cuts, so I just sliced through some of them. So I was just signing away, nice and easy. And next minute, down in a little damp area, in a very thick tangle of buttercup, hopped out a little frog. So I was like, woo, that was close. And in that moment, just in that moment, an image came to my mind of frog spawn on our pond up near the house, where I don't live. I don't live in the house, but up near the house, we have a deep pond and plunge pond, but it's full of pondweed and all sorts of funny plants that clean water. But this year I noticed we had a very, very warm, early spell of weather. And I thought to myself, well, the frogs are spawning a little bit early. And then not long after, when the frog spawn was all over the pond, came a big freeze. So in that moment, that was the image that arrived. When the frog hopped out, the image came of the frozen frogs. And that told me so many lessons. We're experiencing climate change. This is extremely challenging for all of the creatures. Forget about the humans. It's challenging for us as well. But the creatures of the most minute level, I believe, is challenging, and we're losing. They're losing to that. There's a lot that can be extinct. The number of people that come to our farm and go, oh my God, a frog! Look at this! I can't wait to show my little child a frog. We see them all the time. But it was interesting that the frog jumped out. Of course, I stopped the work and realised the preciousness of that tangle of vegetation on the damp soil. The frogs listened in time. And yeah, so the lessons that came from that work, how lucky I was that I was able to read what the land was telling me, and how interesting and how accurate and how strong that lesson, the image came straight to my mind. I didn't think it up. It just came frozen frogs, and the whole thing laid out for me. So I don't listen too much in the way of media. I'm definitely not on any social media. And yet I'm fairly current in saying the important things that are going on in the world. So I just wanted to start with those two little stories. And next I have a little declaration which was read out to mark White Australia's Bicentenary Day on the 26th of January 1988. An Aboriginal man named Burnham, along with some companions, took out a rowboat and went ashore at the White Cliffs of Dover in England. I don't know if any of you heard that story. So he and his friends rowed ashore, wearing full ceremonial possum skin robe and red headband, planted an Aboriginal flag into the sand and read out the following declaration. I, Burnham, being a nobleman of ancient Australia, to hereby take possession of England on behalf of the Aboriginal people. In claiming this colonial outpost, we wish no harm to your natives, but assure you that we are here to bring you good manners, refinement, and an opportunity to make Kupatu a fresh start. Henceforth, Aboriginal face will appear on your coins and stamps to signify our sovereignty over this domain. For the more advanced, we bring you the complex language of the Pitch and Charter. We will teach you how to have a spiritual relationship with the earth and show you how to get bush tucker, bush food. We do not intend to souvenir, pickle, and preserve the heads of 2,000 of your people, nor to publicly display the skeletal remains of your Royal Highness, as was done to our Queen Truganini for 80 years. Neither do we intend to poison your waterholes, lace your flour with strychnine, or introduce you to highly toxic drugs. Based on our 60,000-year heritage, we acknowledge the need to preserve the Caucasian race as of interest to antiquity, although we may be inclined to conduct experiments to measure the size of your skulls for levels of intelligence. We pledge not to sterilize your women, nor to separate your children from their families. We give an absolute undertaking that you shall never be placed onto the mentality of handouts for the next 5 generations, but you will enjoy the full benefits of full Aboriginal equality. At the end of 200 years, we will make a treaty to validate occupation by peaceful means and not by conquest. Finally, we solemnly promise not to make a quarry of England and export your valuable minerals back to the old country, Australia. And we vow never to destroy 3/4 of your trees, but to encourage earth repair action, to unite people, communities, religions, and nations in a common, productive, peaceful purpose. I'd say I can practically end my talk with that. Yeah, it's an extraordinary thing. And that came from a man who was stolen at 3 years old from his family and reared on the other side of the country with colonialists. So he really did well to find his way back. It's a very strong culture. So in starting with Burnham's magnificent gesture of rebellion, I want to believe that I'm a nice disposed person for Aboriginal culture. Australia, nor do I claim any authoritative knowledge about them. But in learning together here today a little about their culture, which has been so highly successful over 60,000 years or more, we might best examine the cracks in our own comparatively very young capitalist system. Points Burnham has highlighted that are of most interest to us here today as we search for the voice of nature are his promise to teach a spiritual relationship with the land, his assurance that 1/3 of our trees won't be cut down, and that the export of valuable minerals won't be extracted through mining practices. It is in itself a great pointer towards where we have gone so wrong. Of course, learning good manners, refinement, and opportunity to make a fresh start would be most useful in this time of hate speech, cancel culture, and capitalism in free fall. So having started with Burnham, let's flick over to our own poor, broken culture that is floundering around in a pathetic state of wreckage and denial. So I'd like to put next the film with the bird song, the next one up. Put the bird song on, we place it into the these most of these nature photographs taken down in the place which we are rewilding. So where are we now? It might seem incongruous to have this video on loop background following semi-rabbit. It might seem incongruous to have this video on loop as a background to the following semi-rant podcast, but it's there deliberately to remind us of what's at stake. main driving force of this work. To me, our insular culture has morphed into what I call the snatch and grab culture. Our drive for more has become unconscious and insatiable. The desire to travel the world, buy the latest everything, have all that we deserve, live the life. Thanks to our mindless gullibility, capitalism thrives for the men in control, and the rest of us just get more angry and more sad. We don't care what countries we exploit for their natural resources, even though all countries are on this one planet that we have. And we don't care how Mother Earth is supposed to deal with our oceans of cast-on plastics and broken toys when we become bored with them, or when industry comes up with a newer, better and more expensive model of phone, TV, car, sofa, tractor, etc. Our capitalist system of governance and leadership cultivates competition. So fear of missing out has become a significant part of our problem. We're rarely satisfied with anything and are therefore never at peace with ourselves, always striving for more, better, different, even though we think we're just shopping. We rarely experience the joy of missing out, except when we're so wrecked from overactivity or overindulgence that all we can do is crash out on the couch with the blue light of the television filling the room. Our society has become weighted down with seemingly insoluble problems and continuing crises that need urgent attention but don't get it because of more immediate problems we all have to wade through on a daily basis. The actual system that is so broken and rotten to the core, where all this misery emanates from, is not on the to-do list. We don't seem to realise that it's the actual system itself that's causing all this pressure and unhappiness, ill health and violence. And of course, the destruction of this one beautiful and wondrous earth. We run around in circles confirming to ourselves and each other how bad things are, as if the results of industrial capitalism isn't our own creation. In his latest book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, Charles Eisenstein speaks of the crushing of our spirit, the effects of the relentless ugliness of the industrial society. I think it's such a powerful line to describe where we are. Despite the fact that global industrial companies are apparently still making large profits, all else is being negatively impacted. The natural environment is being whittled away by each successive generation, but the majority of us don't seem to even notice. Of course, there's been numerous books written on the subject, so book knowledge isn't fixing things either. The more monstrous industrial animal farming becomes, the more invisible the plight of those poor souls whose one chance at their one wild and precious life is spent locked up in an overcrowded building behind the security gates of the so-called farm. John, I want to find a slide from here, which I'll just need to look on. No, it's not. Oh, I should have had that on. See what I'm like. I just have to. I'm going to get it here because it's. Oh, it doesn't have the little side things.
No.
No, it can't. So I can have to. So these cows were part of my market. We had a herd of 10 cattle, 7 of them, and they lived from birth to death on our farm. They never faced the slaughterhouse. They lived a very beautiful life, massively. So while I'm talking about this monstrous industrial animal farming, this is the way cows like living. If you go to the next image. So even when it's snowing, when the weather is bitterly cold, they chose to go out in the winter and come into their sheds at night. That's how cattle live. That's how they want to live, and that's how they're entitled to live. So thanks for that. I just wanted to. So yes, locked up in an overcrowded building behind the security gates of the so-called farm, waiting to be carted off to face the terror of the slaughterhouse. How completely opposite from the cute drawings of what a farm is, as depicted in our educational children's books, which are still widely in circulation, even though they no longer bear any resemblance to truth. As the supermarket ads for eggs, for example, show happy little chickens are. It's a complete lie. It's part of, our system is just wrong. So nor does the capitalist economy serve the majority of the global population. Instead, it's causing inequality, poverty, fear, and wars across the world. Not surprisingly, our physical, mental, and psychological well-being is eroding, along with the integrity of our soils, plant health, waterways, and the very air we are drawing into our lungs right now. The word sustainable is frequently used by politicians and industry, but common sense tells us that the word has lost its meaning over time. And then there is the little matter of climate change, continuing to expect accelerated material and economic growth from a finite planet that has been plundered and impoverished on an enormous scale over the last few hundred years amounts to madness. And madness is in evidence all around us. It's clear that industrial capitalism is the elephant in the room, and it's shaping up to become potentially the most lethal foe humanity has ever had to face. So let's face it. So I want to put up the slide, the first text slide. Go back. Sorry, I didn't get them.
This one?
That's the one, yeah. So let's face it. You know, that's an expression my father used to use a lot. Let's face it, you can't stand in the way of development. That's what I used to be told. I used to think, there'll be nothing left by the time I'm an adult. It's all, you know, Australia was developing. It's like an exciting new country. So let's face it, face into it. But nature is still, oh, hang on, that's capitalism seems to have really taken control during what was to become known as the Industrial Revolution. Google says the Industrial Revolution started in England in the 1760s. Interestingly, almost 30 years before the English landed on the shores of Aboriginal land. Industrial thinking must have been well established by then, which would explain a lot. Australia must have seemed to those poor greed-blinded people who grabbed the land like a huge expanse of natural resources just begging to be exploited. Some geologists argue that the Industrial Revolution was the beginning of the Anthropocene. We'll speak more about that later. The hierarchy, or more accurately, patriarchy, as those in control at that time appear to have been exclusively men, gave themselves permission to ignore the ancient laws of nature and set about using natural resources, that is, nature itself, to produce their goods for profit. In Australia, these men assumed authority over the people who came into the land at the dawn of creation. By using methods of deceit, blind arrogance, violence, murder, and unspeakable brutality. Their minds were fixed on the motive to make profit. So there it is. That's the main motive. And here it is being expressed on the shores of Australia. Speak for weeks about that here. So having first created the absurd and cunning notion that men could take ownership of land and do what he wants to it, Australia very quickly became a free-for-all. Well, not free for all, actually. If you're a woman or an Aboriginal person, you wouldn't get anything. This is from Uncle Max Stulumman, who was a beautiful Aboriginal man who died last, that I met a few times, who's from the Yuin Nation, which is where I grew up. I'd just like to actually if we could just all hold this in our own hearts, that I just would like to give acknowledgement to the Yuin Nation in particular, all of Aboriginal Australia, because their ancestry has been held so faithfully by their knowledge keepers and their elders over 60,000 years. What we're touching into here is land-based system, and only for them carrying that all this time, it's mind-blowing. So I'd just like to just acknowledge the nation, because the land where I grew up is always Aboriginal land, and always will be. So Uncle Max was a Yuin Nation, 5 times initiated elder, and I had the privilege to meet him on a few occasions. So he says we belong to the land because Mother Earth feeds us and births everything. Non-Indigenous people think they own the land and look on it as wealth or money. Of course, in the absolute reality, the land is not a thing that can be bought and sold as someone's possession. Land ownership is a relatively new block concept, thought up and forcibly implemented by a handful of men several hundred years ago, mainly as the tool of colonialism. Now, of course, it's been normalised throughout the world. The earth itself is a living entity in its own right. The soil, rivers, oceans, air, sky, all belong to the earth. That's obvious. Therefore, to assume any of it can become the possession of a human being is either delusional or 3-part trickery, possibly a combination of both. I put down here delusional, characterised by holding false beliefs or judgments about external reality that are held despite incontrovertible, I can say that word, evidence to the contrary. So that is incontrovertible evidence. We all know that in our hearts. So I put, well, climate change may be the incontrovertible evidence here to show us just what happens when half-baked human-centric concepts played out across the world. In her book, White Fella Jump Up, Elaine Greer reports from first contact, the leaders of many Aboriginal peoples saw that sharing the land would only be possible if the white fellas could be drawn into the Aboriginal system. They pursued a deliberate policy of co-option, hoping to civilise the invaders who had no conception of considerate and viable use of country into abandoning their inappropriate concepts of ownership and exclusivity. She goes on to say that in a few years, banks and corporations had control of virtually all the land. So the patriarchy gave itself permission to own land and destroy nature. Nature was no longer the authority that had determined the direction of human activity across the world for thousands of years. Instead, economic growth became the sole focus and motivation. Authority came from patriarchy, women are now disempowered, and so nature was plundered to the precarious point that we now find ourselves standing at the edge of the precipice. That's the background. I know I'm going to end up in a mumble here, but what's what I'm doing. Keep going. Keep going. Go. There. Thank you. But nature is still the true authority. I love that slide. It's like a goddess rising up above the town of Carrick-on-Shannon. As we're finding out the hard way, First Nations people, of course, never stopped knowing this. So after where we are now, how do we get out of this mess? Our attempts to reverse this destruction are not working. If we look at the multitude of ideas we've come up with, trying to halt species extinction, biodiversity loss and global warming, etc., those ideas have all emerged from within the field of capitalist system, and they're not working. Global temperatures continue to rise, and the remnants of wild nature continue to diminish. How can it be otherwise? Our whole psychology today has emerged from within capitalism over the last few hundred years. We in the snatch and grab culture know nothing else. We've been conditioned to the extent that we cannot imagine any other way of being. Sure, if you look at that, you'll find that's true. Our minds have become so dull that we hardly consult for anything of real relevance to our current predicament, preferring instead to put together ideas from what we have been taught in the education industry or what turns up on the internet, the ultimate tool of capitalism. Or we switch on the TV and give into lethargy, filling our brains with white sugar. Meanwhile, the hollow voice of patriarchy drones on, mansplaining away anything that might upset the status quo, talking about talking and talking about talks endlessly. In her summing up of Cop Out 26, Greta Thunberg says, blah, 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 business as usual. She saw no change on the horizon except climate change. If we're on COP 26, surely that's in itself proof these talk shops bear little success in the face of fundamental change that needs to occur within the human psyche. We think what the capitalist system has trained us to think. We're taught what to think, not how to think. Therefore, the ideas we come up with are always second-hand, coming from the past. The solutions inevitably involve more human activity, even though human activity is identified as one of the central causes. Should go back to the text. Next one. No. That one. Yeah. So human activity is there high up on the spectrum. Even though human activity is identified as one of the central causes of the problem. And also, of course, spending or making money. How much will it cost? How much will we make? Which is the other most central factor in the cause of the problem. We apply the condition of provided, of course, that it's economically viable to every single human endeavour to fix the mess that has been created by the pursuit of profit and economic growth. So the capitalist paradigm continues to play out despite our best efforts to halt rising temperatures. The more our ideas to fix global warming arise from within the same field as the system that has caused global warming, the more we are doomed to fail. Could I ask someone just to open the window now that the door's been closed? And also, of course, spending. So the capitalist paradigm is, please look closely at this and search out the truth of it. Our minds are working against us. Every idea we have comes from our thoughts, which emerge out of the culture of imperialism, capitalism, the extension of colonialism. And that's what has caused and continues to cause this broken way of living. Our tweaking, oh yeah, I wanted to put up a slide. So the one, again, if you just go, there's a quote from J. Krishnamurti. Yeah, yeah. Our tweaking might improve green credentials of capitalism, but as the definition says, the essential feature of capitalism is the motive to make a profit. We now know that is the wrong thinking. I hope we're on the same page. So I hope this is being followed. So let's look at the first two words in the next slide, which is the one that follows the capitalism. It's the Anthropocene. Yeah. So anthropocentric, regarding humankind as the central or most important element of existence, especially as opposed to God, or God forbid, animals. And then the second word, the Anthropocene, the current geological age, viewed as the period during which human activity has been the dominant influence on climate and the environment. So just looking at those two words together, does it follow then that the first one, anthropocentric, is the driving force that's causing the second one, Anthropocene? Is the human activity referred to in the second definition a direct consequence of the humankind regarding itself, or put another way, thinking about itself, as the most important element of existence in the first definition. If that's true, which after a brief examination becomes so obvious that why didn't we see it before, we may be approaching an idea that hasn't yet been defined, but it has been thought of before. A person who has affected my life quite a lot, been reading since I was kind of late teens, is J. Krishnamurti, an Indian philosopher is the wrong word. But he talked about from back in 1930, right through his teachings, he died in 1986, I think, about a psychological revolution. That's what was needed. So that's, apart from him, I haven't heard that referred to anywhere. I might not, because I don't, as I say, I read nature most of the time, and stuff doesn't turn up in that book. But Krishnamurti definitely did. That, in fact, that was the entire plank of his work, was looking at that aspect of how our psyche manifests then outwardly. So that's what we're looking at in this chunk of the work. So if this is true, then how we function internally, our thoughts, opinions, pre-programmed internal responses, beliefs, the words we use are responsible for creating the mess we're in. In that case, our inner world today as individuals becomes vitally important. If there is a relationship between the anthropocentric resulting in the Anthropocene, then we surely must examine how we think, what opinions we hold, how we regard our role in this world, and where we place ourselves in the order of things. And this, patient listeners, must happen as a solo journey. I don't believe that the majority of people in our snatch and grab culture are consciously anthropocentric, although I could be wrong. It's fairly certain that the men at the controls do think that way. But perhaps with most of us, it's an unconscious mindset that snuck up on us, took over, and is now firmly rooted in our minds. Because of the deadening effect of capitalism on our minds, we don't even notice we hold that point of view and yet function from that place. So is everything we do the result of an unconscious, intensively programmed inner pattern which we are unaware that we follow? Does every effort we make to reverse climate change stem from an unconscious mindset shaped by generations of living under a capitalist regime? Would it even be possible to bring about a truly just and holistically sustainable world while continuing to live from a mindset that has been shaped by a social system made up by a bunch of capitalist industrialists who promote materialism as a legitimate, just and sustainable way of life? Please consider this carefully. Look at the origins of our culture as expressed in Australia, and look in all the other countries that were colonised since 1788 and onwards, and look at the evidence today in our society, as those characteristics are still being played out here and now. We are no longer human beings, we have become consumers. Is this fact alone not worth making change for? So now the next word with its two definitions is this one. Oh no, sorry. It comes next, does it? No, keep going. Oops. There, no, keep going. There, that's it. So revolution. The one I'm interested in is a fundamental change in the way of thinking or visualizing something, a change in paradigm. So the first one didn't even include the environment in the definition, so obviously it wasn't thought out very well. And anyway, it's about yet more human activity, which we've seen where that leads us. So it's number two that's of interest to us here. Perhaps it represents something new that we haven't tried, or perhaps we've forgotten the how-to of something very old. In our way of thinking or visualizing something, our way of thinking or visualizing something could help to cause the fundamental change we so desperately need in order to stop the wrecking ball of industrial capitalism and awaken to the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, surely it's worth giving a go. But there's been so many revolutions that fall into the first definition, and the only one that falls into the second is from J. Krishnamurti, spent over 50 years offering his teachings, and almost every word was faithfully recorded and archived. He's not easy to read. I found him excellent value. So as discussed, we've tried changing the problems as they manifest externally. So far, that hasn't worked in tackling the problem, because we now know that if our inner functioning doesn't come first, then the external won't happen. And when you think about the drive behind the inner functioning of the men who moved into Australia and took the land, it was immense. Without that happening, they would have achieved nothing. But they had the drive, they organised themselves, all of their energies went into getting that land, making money, so that they could become wealthy people and end all this miserable poverty for the minority people. So it's a very valid point, I think. It's what this work hangs on, is that we have to somehow, as each individual, examine the way we think, what we do. I can give one example. I had the most incredible sort of coincidence that happened. I was over on one of the islands. No, Gabriel, my partner, my husband, was over on one of the islands on Loch Earn, and he met a group of people who were camping there. He said, young people, I've never met young people like them, extraordinary young people. And they had these boats, these canoes that looked like they arrived from heaven. They were white and they were made from gorgeous timber, bent wood. I haven't seen that ever in my life, only in photographs. And I said, really, what? You know, I was kind of busy. I was on my way to feed the horses, and who were they? And he said, well, they were, it was a woodworking teacher and his students holidaying together on Loch Earn. It's like a woodworking teacher, like from a school. And he said, that's right. And he nodded kind of in this way. I was thinking, what's he up to? And he said, they come from Brockwood Park, which was one of the schools which Krishnamurti started, and it's in England. And so I just said, I've got to go and meet these people. I had never made it to Brockwood Park, something I'd like to do sometime, as life gets in the way. So anyway, I went and met them, and this lovely woodworking teacher, we had a conversation, met his students. It was extraordinary to be in their company. They were between the ages of kind of 15 and 21. They didn't have any of this kind of coy shyness, nor were they brash. They seemed interested, focused, relaxed people. Anyway, we talked a little bit about the canoe project. When I say woodworking teacher, he was one of the facilitators at Brockwood. And I said, you know, what were the big stumbling blocks? What were the things that you faced? And he said, well, not that many. He said there was one girl actually very early on in the project said, went up to him and said, look, I'm really stuck. I've reached the block here. I really don't know which way to go forward. I tried, and you know, I just don't know how to progress this particular aspect of the work. So he listened. And she said, well, would you tell me what you would do? And he said, oh, look, I know exactly what I do. I've been there myself. I know exactly what to do. But if I tell that to you, you'll never discover what way you'll go forward. She became quite frustrated. She was saying, look, I have tried everything. I really don't know which way to go. Please just tell me. And he said, I know what you could do. Phone your mother. It was completely ridiculous thing to suggest, but it's what she had always done, was phone her mother. And I think that story tells a lot about how we learn and how we don't learn. You know, he was facilitating her, holding her, supporting her, so that she can push through and develop her thinking, develop her brain, her physical brain, and find a method, a way to learn to get beyond this block. So let's try starting from the internal place, which we've now discovered is the root cause of the whole mess. And let's start here and now with you and me. Let's not call it a revolution. There's been enough of those, and they all involve violence and conflict, so we don't need more of that. The word revolution carries too much old baggage now, and this work is new. It needs to be free to move about in many circles. So I was thinking, how can I get beyond this revolution? And just again, I was out walking, holding the work, revelation. So revelation came. So a surprising and previously unknown fact that has been revealed to others. A surprising and previously unknown fact that has been revealed to others. So we could all become revelationaries. I like it too much. Would you invest your life in it? So I've given it this identification. There is a slide there, but a person who cares enough to try to respond to the climate crisis with immediate inner action that is an individual. In light of the realization that governments and others in positions of control are not inclined nor able to do so. So for us to be beating on the doors, it doesn't work, trying to change governments and those in power. I'm not saying don't do it. I had the slide of the girls with the posters. If you want to find it. I'm not saying don't do other things. Look at them, aren't they just gorgeous? They turned up, it was from the Guardian newspaper. By all means, activate, be an activist. But it's not going to work unless this work is also applied to each and every one. So, and I do think, like I can remember as a child, my parents, they were wonderful people and they had a lovely harmonious relationship most of the time. But as a child, I can remember one time being stuck in Australian development, going through Maui, where there was just machines and road building, and it was like something out of a nightmare. And everybody was too hot in the car, and my mother and father started bickering. And I put my hands in my ears because I wasn't familiar with hearing it. They didn't fight very much. I was so blessed. But I put my fingers in my ears and I was thinking, this is just adding to the world of hatred out there. This is adding to it. I was under 7. And it was clear as day. It was a sense of knowing. Now, there's been loads of scientific papers, etc., done, I'm sure, on the collective consciousness. But I just felt that as a child. It was pure knowledge coming up from the situation. I didn't have to investigate it. So it's when we are, that's why it's possible for a minority of people, maybe not this minority that are here, but if this talk goes out a little bit, or if someone else picks up on it and it gets a life of its own, it might be possible to turn things this way. So if we decide to become inner revelations, it only involves us. It can become your very own project. It's not talk, it's action. It's not activity, it's action. So the activity, as soon as the human is let loose and starts being active, particularly in little boys, you see it, the house gets demolished. But this is action, it's an inner action. So we have to make contact with that. It doesn't take any time. It's just a switch. So there's a big difference between action and talk. And Greta Thunberg would approve of that. That's what she's wanting, is action. So own the work completely, shape it to serve you, to be the true inner revelation. Strong, compassionate, clear-minded, consistent, brave, dependable, not afraid of the unknown. And I've listed off 4 strengths of for the inner revelation. Align your life with nature's. Nature roles with the bird song. But it's not very loud, unfortunately. So I was hoping it would be deafening, like it is at home. Yeah. So align your life with nature is number one. Turn your attention away from materialism. So again, it's attention. So it's within the boundary of who you are. It's within your grasp to turn your attention away from materialism. Take back responsibility for the living of your life. It's the only life you can live is yours. And align your heart with Indigenous peoples. So I'll just put through those 4 steps. To join the, yeah, leave that out because it's too long. The next screen. The lovely man who made my PowerPoint is just going to be so horrified. I'm making such a mess of it here. Anyway, what can you do? You have to work with
I'm on spread, just
spread, exactly. Align your life with nature. So, ask yourself, what does nature mean to you? That's a really good question to ask yourself. Is it going running in a natural environment to get fit? Is it going out into nature to shoot wildlife? Setting challenges for yourself on how far you can swim in the sea? Hang gliding over spectacular scenery? Taking magic mushrooms to have an amazing experience in nature? Going on yoga retreats in the forest for your well-being? Walking in the woods with your headphones on, listening to something else, or just soaking up some peace? Becoming an inner revelation doesn't mean you have to drop those activities, but please notice that you're serving yourself. There is no actual meeting taking place. Nature is not an inanimate thing out there. And again, it's easy to think it is, because our whole culture is telling us that's what it is. That's what makes it permissible to destroy nature. But it isn't an inanimate thing. Everybody knows that now. Not everybody, but everyone in this room, I'm sure. It resides in the deepest recesses of our beings. Deep down, you already know this to be true. Despite the ongoing war men are waging against nature, it will not leave us, because we are part of nature. So the war being waged is against us all. Are we not realizing this as the effects of global warming to play out? Here's a quote from Fire, this fantastic book. Look at the books later, we're looking at them. What book best together, I will do. From Victor Stephenson, who is a descendant of the Tagalog people in northern Queensland, says climate change seems to be identified as the new threat by the institutions, taking away the basic truth that people are just disconnected from the land. I don't think you can argue with that. You can't improve on it. It's just the truth. Nature is our greatest well-wisher and the best friend we will ever have. We are part of nature, so we belong to each other. That's why pretending we can own land, to buy and to sell it, is a mockery of life itself. Please at least look at this probably unusual point of view. It is as valid as the view held by the majority of people. More valid, perhaps, because it's been examined, considered, and it came up from the land. It wasn't cooked up by a busy mind, but clever with logic ideas. And I'm not saying you shouldn't buy or sell land, nor am I making a political statement. I'm not pointing to communism or socialism. That's just more of the same in the field of the century. So please just hold that idea lightly and see what happens to it over time within yourself, because we are vehicles for ideas, and those ideas can either lead us one way or the other. That one definitely would lead us out of the mess, should it ever be implemented. Greta Thunberg and her generation are asking for change. They are sick of hearing the same old, and so am I, and so are you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be meeting here today. So please, can we try to learn not to reject something new, but to hold it lightly and to see if there is some merit there. The way we view the land isn't working. While it can feed all the people in Ireland, North and South, it cannot be expected to continue to make profit for anyone. That was never in the original agreement. Somehow we have to reimagine the world with ideas that come from outside of the capitalist conditioning. Remember how we hold the world in our minds and hearts can keep us in the Anthropocene, or it can lead us out of the mess so we can begin Earth repair action in the aftermath of industrial capitalism. Nature is as deep as the oceans and as old as the hills. It was not born into a capitalist system, therefore it is free of it. We've been programmed from the very early weeks of our lives by human-centered promise, and now we're trapped and messed up and dull in the mind, and we have violence in our hearts. Nature is completely outside of all of it. It is therefore untainted by greed, education, egocentricity, hatred, fear, apathy, perfectionism, knowledge, fanaticism, self-pity, on and on and on. It resides completely outside of the field of patriarchal capitalism, and it waits with bated breath for us to find our way back to wisdom, wholeness, and our own true nature, which is to be aligned with all of nature. Right now, we are out of sync with nature and therefore out of sync with ourselves. I see it as simple as that. So when you join the inner revelation and step into nature, step as into the sacred, give your complete attention, go in alone, relax, listen, watch, wait, and wait some more. Wait until you find you've stopped waiting, Then you will meet with nature on solid ground. Let your heart open and let it break. It will break. In that beautiful documentary film, Silver Branch, poet and farmer Patrick McCormick tells us on a deeper level, there is a grief there. I'm not sure where that comes from, it says. There's an incredible grief within that beauty. So, of course, there is also joy in it. Joy of a deep kind, and joy is the ultimate act of defiance against capitalism. The toys we buy from the motor car industry or the clothing industry, etc., the chains of materialism cannot compare in any way to the joy that comes from being deeply connected to nature. Here's David Cloudy, again in the fire book, holding them up so that the image goes in your brain. Please look at them later. So here's David Cloudy. He's a traditional owner custodian whose homelands encompass 840,000 hectares of bioculturally significant country centred on the upper Wenlock and Pasco rivers in Cape Rock Peninsula. He says the old people learned the land the right way without relying on bulldozer tractors. There was nothing between us and the land. So when you walk into nature, like me with the side, thank God it wasn't a strimmer and the frog, just walking with nothing else. You know, and it's not trying to leave your thinking out of it, but watch like a hawk, pay attention to what's going on in or around you. He then goes on to say the problem is not the fire. We're all aware, I'm sure, of the uncontrolled wildfires in Australia, which were predicted. Look, anyone who lived on the land predicted that when I was growing up there. It's people with no proper relationship with the land, says David Cloudy. Everything that is based on the land comes to our heart. So in our culture, everything that we learn comes through the intellect. Heart is left out of it. That, you know, it could be the feminine side that's kind of discounted. Nature has its own unconditioned intelligence, which is always present. So that intelligence only resides in you. You will never encounter that intelligence if you're thinking, as our thoughts always are coming from us. And worrying about or anticipating or thinking about the future is also coming from us. The instrument we think with is shaped by our experiences, which turns to memory, and then it becomes the past. It might be 5 minutes ago, but it is not here. So it prevents, it's a screen that prevents us from actually being in the world. Thought is the main factor that separates us from nature. Nature, all the living entities, the trees and all who live in them and from them, the fungi that make up their telecommunications, every minute insect and the fox with his quick mind, everything and everyone except us lives in and from the immediate. That's the main defining difference between the rest of the world, the entire world, and the human beings. So what our minds churn out in the form of thought will always be from the past. That's what breeds fear in us. This circular thinking that clouds our lives, grips us in paralysis. So thinking will only be a hindrance to the inner revelationary mind, especially when facing into your non-living capitalism. Krishnamurti says, life begins where thought ends. He says, awaken to the unburdened mind. That's really certainly how it's been in my life. So when stepping into nature, your mind must be open and relaxed, not busy and cluttered. Nature will help you to throw a shape on all that tangled up stuff if you give yourself half a chance. When you catch yourself thinking about something else, bring your whole attention to watching the movement of leaves. Watch as if you've never noticed them before. Listen to that bird, that slight breeze, the distant whistle of the buzzard, the ripple on the surface of the water. Even a puddle will show you a vision of the sky. Look for that connection. Draw it into you throughout the day at every possible opportunity. It only takes a glance. I can do it now because there's trees out there. And there's movement in the trees. So rather than dashing to your phone to quickly check your social media feeds, that pacifies a moment of agitation, usually. That's what people respond in that way. All you have to do is throw your eye out the window, look up at the sky if there's nothing, it's there, touch base, make the connection, get on with the day. The more you can do that, the more you can decondition your mind and just move it back towards where it belongs. So look for that connection, draw it into you throughout the day, every possible opportunity. It only takes a glance. You do it with your phone all the time, so why not with nature? Your phone is the ultimate tool for you to live in an entirely human-centric life, with all its petty opinions, endless hollow entertainments, and misery. If you ease nature into your life, the phone and all it represents will lose its charm. I have one quick story. I know I've gone through the time. I was in Carrick Shannon in an apartment. I used to go one day a week. I was writing, which I still haven't finished, to do with my pet cattle. And I thought I would take a break. So I went over to, it was a novelty to be in the town, went and got a coffee, and went and sat on the boardwalk in Carrick Shannon, which is on the river. If you go out onto the river, it's very beautiful. So I was standing in it, just not really thinking of anything, watching the diamonds on the river and clouds moving. And suddenly this flock went up, operation, stunning. They were huge, making those shapes. They're all expanding out into the world, shrinking back and darting somewhere else and disappearing, coming back again. It was breathtaking, the whole thing being in the fresh air and witnessing this incredible scene just at the moment that I was there. And I looked around, it was almost like, who else I could smile at who saw it? There was one boy at about 15, I'll do it because this is what he was like. He was sitting there like this, with his phone. And he had an air of depression. God knows what he was looking at, whatever it was as a virtue. I thought of how many of us do that mindlessly, not realizing the body is slumped over. It's not feeding anything except either our egos or it's a way to reduce our pockets, reduce what's in our pockets. Whereas one glance at a tree, if you keep practicing that, just to keep practicing it. We don't have time for endless research to see what is vital. We've lost so much time waiting for governments to change things. And how did that go? Exactly, nothing happened. The inner revelation represents no risk. We don't have to get it right and make it perfect. We don't have to waste time talking about it. We don't have to wait for the perfect time to start. We just have to take action, not activity, action. Each individual person in their own way, no fanfare, no big organization, just each person alone, acting on their own initiative with zero support. When you find the energy and inner strength to rise above, let go of, drop, leave behind the clamour of the deadening effects of the human-centered mindset and step with your wild and precious life into nature, the thing inside you that hungers to be filled by more falls away. You can step out of the snatch and grab into the realm of the unknown, where time stops and knowledge rises up from the land to show you the way to live properly. Patrick McCormick, the same poet farmer, says, find your favourite place and let it flow to you. And if your favourite place, now I have to ask you to change the slide with the bell wings. Next one, that one.
Yeah.
And if your favourite place is a bit of a distance away, you can call it to mind and rest in there for a little while. This is my heart place. I just lived up on the hill from there. It's in a very remote part of New South Wales, Australia. And I spent, I don't know how many hours along the farm before then. And I do have one. But if you do find, so identify what place is pulling you. I mean, when I don't choose that little place, what was I drawn to that? On the other side of the sand is the ocean. Yet this little place, this development was important to me. So if your favourite place, if you live in place where all you can see is concrete, go find your place that calls you and spend time in there that first time. Once you've done that and developed the connection, it will stay with you. So that if in your apartment you're looking at the wall, you can just sit and just call it to mind. Minds are so brilliant to find this energy. Call that to mind. And when I visited Uncle Max Hill, he says, when you do, because I was leaving Australia, my parents had then died, I knew I would. He said, when you do that, when you call to mind your spiritual place, country knows you're there. So, in other words, it's a two-way connection. So that when you do that, and why would anybody doubt 5 times initiated person? They have no cleverness. We have that image. They don't have clever ideas. They just follow them. So that meant the world to me, and I do it frequently. So happy to see this slide up here today. Yeah, so that is. Just have one other little thing. This one I just want to bring out. Is that all right, John?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we want discussion, but so it's just my story. I grew up in Australia. So throughout my entire childhood, I only met a small handful of personalities. I hold deep respect for the Asian people. When, as a child, I questioned the adults in my life as to what happened to the Aboriginal people. I was told that they were just a dying race, literally a dying race, So I figured that must be how the world worked. Perhaps one day our race would also die and would be replaced by a different, newer, better race of people. But the woodland around where my family lived seemed to hold the memory of a different story to the one I was told. The silence of the dark waters along the creek, the lonely chime of bellbirds in the high trees, the unique scent of native bush after rain, the dance of the lyrebird. Maybe it was like a living history book that told another story. It was like feeling truth with my fingertips, but never being able to hold it in my hands. Like most children, I was hungry to know the truth. The sight of the red-tailed cockatoos that nested in the trees above my grandfather's small dairy, the way they carried big sticks up into those tall treetops, as they've done for hundreds or more like thousands of years, and hearing the timeless call of the plovers that reared their young along the sandy banks of the creek, their footprints marking the land as their own. From all those things, I knew there was another story that wasn't being told by my people, that Australia was not a new country at all, but a very, very old one. I couldn't have known then that Australia wasn't actually my country at all, nor was there any hint left behind that my grandfather's father's father more than likely was one of the murderers who picked up a rifle to clear the land of the people, as did many of his generation at that time. Land that they took up and given by the British government had big midlands all along the river. They weren't thousands of years old. Recent. I was well into my teens when a slow dawn shone its spotlight on the subject of Aboriginal people and the horror story of what happened to them, and how that story was obliterated by generations of silence. Thankfully, it turns out that the first people weren't a dying race after all. In fact, in many parts of the Dutch continent, the people are still protecting country and practicing ceremony and retrieving their law and many languages, and even teaching the dominant culture about their ways. That could never have happened up there. In many ways, I voted with my feet because of that whole issue. Those people were the ones on the receiving end of the savagery of colonization, so the true story of what happened was not obliterated by generations of silence in their society. They recorded it all as they recorded everything, and of course the land holds the memory. So my early intuition as a child, so wonderfully validating to hear that come through. Let's see that the culture that they're following is the correct one. I'm not going to read that verse, I just have nearly at the end of the land here. These are one that Penny printed out for me. So this one, oh yeah, you could leave that. Actually, two things. Is that all right? Because they know anything out. Leave the country. Find the one that printed out, especially for me this morning. Yep, it was really just to, I was going to talk about the patriarchy. I did a page on it. Just which, I suppose it has to be acknowledged here. That this lady here, Rebecca Sullivan, I haven't read much feminist literature, but I just happened to pick this up when I was in a bookshop, which is pretty out of character. She had it nailed. Said, I think the future of something we may no longer call feminism must include a greater inquiry into men. Feminism sought and seeks to change the whole human world, Many men are on board with the project, but how it benefits men and in what ways the status quo damages men as well could bear far more thought. Like racism, misogyny can never be adequately addressed by its victims alone. The men who get it also understand that feminism is not a scheme to deprive men, but a campaign to liberate us all. There's more that we need to be liberated from, maybe a system that prizes competition and ruthlessness and short-term thinking and rugged individualism, a system that serves the environmental destruction and limitless consumption so well. That arrangement we could call capitalism. It embodies the worst of machismo while it destroys what's best of them. More men fit into it better, but it doesn't really serve anyone else. There's one quick story. A young man I met only a few weeks ago who is involved in his work is going to be in research. He's doing work experience. And I said to him, how's it going? You know, you're enjoying it. Oh, he said, look, I'm learning a lot. Yeah, it's fine. So, don't sound too enthusiastic there, Philip. And I said, but you know what it is? It's traveling in the cab, in the truck to go to different sites. He said, I'm in with two other blokes, and every single woman they pass, they make a comment about their body shape. Either she's someone desirable that they want to get off with, or she's a big lump that, you know, Jesus, look at the ass on that. You know, and it's like, he said, it's like he was being coerced into thinking like them. And he's a sweetheart, lovely young man, he's about 20. And I said, well, you know, what did you do? He said, I just didn't do anything, and that was the worst part about it. Sit there and say nothing. So I'm bringing that up at the end of all that lovely nature, just to ask that can be, that is a really big block towards more moving forward, I think, in our society, and that women can't address it. It needs to have, I don't know what, whether it's fire circles or something where men can actually speak to each other instead of just to address that, because that's the main push that's destroying everything. You know, where I live, there's all of the industrial farming, not industrial like you'd find in Kildare or places, but mean little hedgerows growing around the edges of fields. It's all men who are driving the tractors, spreading the fertilizer, spreading the poisons, going in with diggers. And again, it's not to try and stop that, but somehow to involve them as in revelations. Because if they had those revelations, it would be a revelation for them, and it would help everybody. And just to say that I have books up here. Look, I didn't get it together to make a book list, but if anybody wants one, a book list, because these books, you know, the last of these strengths we have, turning our heads away from materialism, the last one of those is connecting at the heart with Indigenous peoples. Now, I know the Australian situation the best, and they're the oldest culture. So, and they have this websites now by Aboriginal people, that magnificent book, Fire, just fantastic book, full of photographs, but there's websites in there that to look up. And just, you know, instead of watching something mindless on the television or getting hooked into some soap, go online and look up, you know, managing fire in Australia or something like that, or look from this book, the book list I'm giving you is full of them. To keep building on that in your mind, to keep building on the people who didn't grow up in the capitalist system. You know, it's been around 60,000 years. That's an example of their land management. I didn't clear it with the people who produced these books. Just as everything. That's just fire management. That's permanent. That's because of the close relationship they have with nature. They don't have any books. They just read them. So that's all I have to offer today. Thank you so much for your attention. I'm very grateful. I know I've gone by. So.
Yes.
When the morning breaks and the light comes flooding, dawn on all our lives, and the air is thinning. Who sings the stars down from the darkness? Who cracks open the dawn? Us, riding the torch. Us, riding around us moments. Us, riding down the friends, singing in the first green branch. Oh, join in the dawn chorus. No words can describe the music of the chimes of the air. Who sings away the haggle and dark? Who sings the sun up into the morning? Who tracks open the dawn? Us, oh, that water, us, crying around grass mornings. Us, crying back the rains. Singing in the fresh green grass. Oh, joy in the dawn chorus. All the best musicians were singers. All the best singers were birds. Who sings the sun up into the morning? Who sings away the hangover? Hearts held high. Who cracks open the dawn? Us, crying that fire in the church. Us, crying around the slums. Us, crying down the rains. Singing in the fresh green branches. Oh, joy in the dawn chorus. Oh, joy in the dawn chorus. Oh, joy in the dawn chorus. Give the glory, the linnet sings with all its heart and holds nothing back. The turtle dove sings for free. The blackbird sings best from her nest, the blackthorn tree. Without them, there is no music. The skylark and the meadowlark, the chaffinch, the chiffchaff, the greenfinch, goldfinch, they sing for all their words. And the wren, the king of all words. Enchanted cascades of brilliant, liquid melody, pour from the bullfinch, the crossbill, the hawfinch, the linnet, the rosefinch, the woodwarper, and the willowwarper. The blackcap, the doddock, the garden warper. The redstart, the redwing, the bluethroat, the seedfare, and the nightingale, pouring her liquid notes out over the river in the morning. Stone chat, wind chat, house sparrow, tree sparrow, hedge sparrow, the morning lark, the mountain lark that sings away the dark. For sheer joy, they sing the dawn. Without them, there is no music.
The boss, the John Spillane. Who the boss?
Yeah.
So listen, thank you. Can I ask somebody ask people online and thank you. So we do have a bit of time now for any questions or comments, either online or in the room. As usual, I have loads of things I didn't ask, but here. So any questions or comments? Dan?
Again, it just strikes me in the phrase, a plea for mindfulness.
What? Please
A plea for mindfulness.
Yeah.
The summation. How do you react to that?
Look, I don't like the word mind in there. It is more like a revelation. And I think revelation comes to the heart. You know, when you have a revelation, you know, it's rare in our society that happens. When you do, it comes to the heart. And like David Clowney said, you know, they read the land, it comes to our heart. That's where the messages come. Certainly with the little frog, you know, and with the birds in the brambles, the wren came to my heart first, joy happened, and then the lessons came. So that seems to be, I'm not an expert in long living cultures, but I grew up on that land, the same as 60,000 years worth of Aboriginal people. And I was an introvert and a loner. So I spent an awful lot of time just on that little sandy bank, watching the plumbers with their bagels and all that whole thing. So I do think mindfulness, look, it's also a word that carries weight now, which doesn't need baggage. So that's, I know what you're saying, but I think this work that I'm offering, linking in with Aboriginal people and nature is the way out of the mess. And mindfulness doesn't, it's fine to practice mindfulness if you're in nature. Chances are you'll meet nature. But if you're practicing anything, it's for self. So it's better to just leave everything. Try to leave everything. And I just think the more, certainly that's how it's been in my life. The more I throw the glance at the trees, if I'm feeling agitated, I might look at the trees or I might go out to the city. I was in the city in Dublin one time. God, it was horrific, stinking hot, traffic everywhere, knee blind in one eye and trying to make my way to the train station. Road works going on. And as I passed, a little piece of nothing, a little tiny piece of shrubbery, which would soon be gone. Out came this sound, birdsong, just one note. And there I was, backing myself. And I thought of that little bird. There it was in amongst all of that, hearts held high, as John Spillane says, giving its note to the air. So we have to somehow find a way to mimic that, or to find ourselves. Thanks, Dan.
Anyone on? Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you were saying about how like Indigenous groups aren't motivated by profit and never really were. Why are we like? Why did we? At what stage did we diverge where profit and desire for more started? Because it's not just capitalism. Feudalism was just as brutal. We were just as detached from the land. Like we used to be temperate rainforest here in Ireland hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
Deforestation in most places is recent, but it's not here. It's been from hundreds of years. So why are we different? When did that start?
That's such a valuable contribution. That's such a valuable contribution because none of us know. I don't think any of us know. But it's to recognise that that is a reality and it lives in all of us. You know, we know how we behave with a sail or something. I know how I behave with secateurs. You know, I go out with the secateurs thinking, God, those brambles are getting out of hand in the pony yard. So I prune away. And I was there one day, there was a bee, because they were flowering. There was a huge bumblebee. I was so happy to see bumblebee. And I was clipping. And I practically had to hold my hand back from clearing the entire brambles. You know, even with my sensitivity towards nature, the urge was there to tidy up that mess, as I would have been told as a kid, get rid of all that rubbish. So I think we have to watch ourselves like a hawk, here and now. You have it, I have it, all of us here have that desire. It's an inbuilt thing. Aboriginal people don't seem to have it. They do now. I just want to hear that one thing from here, Dark Emu. This is a fantastic, just an incredible that this man has done Aboriginal, Bruce Pascoe, Dark Emu. And he says, there is no doubt that Aboriginal life was not one long dream of peace and harmony. Anger, bitterness, betrayal, revenge, and punishment were all common. But they were governed by strict rules. The violence is often punishment, defined in the execution of law. So we export our violence. We don't have it in our nice society, except when people burst out of the seams. Then the violence is part of it. So he says, the violence was part of punishment enshrined in the execution of law and tried and true systems of cultural and social and religious maintenance. We don't have that. Yes, in his acknowledgement, he says, I'm grateful to the ancestors. This is more pointed towards your point. I'm grateful to the ancestors for their ingenious protection of the land. Where else on earth was there a civilization that lasted more than 80,000 years, he says, and depended on both agriculture and peace? So the feudal system had one thing, but they didn't have the other. They didn't have something to anchor that peace. Would you mind just putting on? It's just the second last slide. Well, the last slide, the second last slide, and then the last slide, both the same. So in Modean, this fantastic book, I just the great book, it's called Why Warriors Lie Down and Die. And it was written by a man who is now in his 70s. And he went to the Yorba, very northern Queensland, which were one of the last people, Northern Territories, one of the last people being visited by foreigners. And they're suffering very badly because they're trying to make sense of our culture. There's absolutely no way that's going to happen because it simply doesn't make sense. So they're feeling, and what he did, he learned their language. So each clan has 4 languages, each small tribe, because there's different clans that come from other clans. So he learned 4 languages of that area, and he's still there. He raised his family there. One of his sons has now produced this fantastic piece of work. But in this, through getting this book, I found out about the Magaya, which is what I was trying to find later in the idea I can read it. With you? It's the one with the ancient, thanks. It's the best. But it's the one. But in there, he talks a little bit, and it's the first time I've ever read about their culture because no one's known about it. No one asked about it. They were just nomads. If you look into there's no need to. There's an immense amount of cover when British arrived in Australia, in their east. So there was no problem with lying, no problem whatsoever, just telling the truth. This guy, anyway, because he had language, he became very close friends with, he was an engineer who went up there as a young engineer. And there was a man in the engineering shop who was actually an elder from the Yolngu people. And they became very close friends. And it's because he had language, he could see the dreadful thing that was happening through that they didn't understand because no one bothered to speak their language. So he was bunched. So this guy was a real entertainer. He's produced this great book. And in the introduction, the engineering elder says, calls him Walnut, is his Aboriginal name. He's been initiated now. He says, Gosh, Walnut, I thought when you were talking about writing a book, oh no, it's called the white man's disease. Instead of facing something straight on, they write a book about it. So, and there is this wonderful Medean culture, and the strongest part of that is this thing called the Magai, and that is a description which that requires it. Sorry, but it's talking about equality. It's the most important plank that they have to their culture, and it's talking about a state of calm. So they use the analogy of a river or a lake, a body of water that is completely without rhythm, and they teach how to maintain that in human heart at all times. So that is the priority. So if they go into negotiations or into their parliamentary meetings, which they have a similar thing, that they're coming from that state. And having met the handful of people that I have met, oh my God, they break your heart. Well, I tell you what, you could read about here. I just can't read this because it's too small.
Is that anybody online?
No question.
I looked up my guy the day. Not on Wikipedia. It's not classic. It's not that. No, I couldn't find it anyway. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. But no, I looked it up and then I found it in his son's book. And what? That's available. Check that out. He's online. Why Warriors? The book is called Why Warriors Lie Down and Die. And it was written for care workers. But Why Warriors is their website. It's magnificent work what they're doing. Really. The declaration is going to be probably scattered on the streets between. So yeah, so each of these three parts, they're talking about the Dayan culture. Each of these three parts is served and protected by the other two: country, people, and law. So their system is based on country, which means the land, language. For them, it's much more abrasive. Country, people, and law have always existed together. This worldview grounds the system and in practical terms creates a three-way rights equality in governance and decision-making. Country must be considered, people must be considered, and no one is above the law. Country, people, and law. One depends on the other. One cannot ignore them. With this relational circle in mind, the system is conciliatory, with three units acting mutually in consideration of each other, where decisions are made within the limits of these three qualities. Not the same, but equally empowered. Keeping balance is a way one might describe governance generally, but this is the basic unit of that balance. It's so foreign to our thinking. And that's, I would have liked to have spent more time on that had I been better organised. But that's what I was saying about, the idea of buying land, buying and selling land. It's such a foreign thing to us because we have invested so much in it. We have to somehow find a place within ourselves to not just go, oh, for God's sake, but to hold it and say, hold on, this could happen. And just carry it with us. It's not to go looking up books and searching out. It's to find where that sits with you and to keep working on the inner. And I think men have to do it. I wish that there was a way to contact men. I don't mean men who are feminists, but to have that that revelation. It would be a revelation for the heads at the top. Change in a moment.
I wanted to say thanks so much. I found the whole presentation so enjoyable, and I really completely agree with you with everything you're saying. And I know it's true, like I know in my heart it's true. And I come from the countryside, so I guess I have that connection with nature, and I do find it difficult when I'm in a city and I just see kind of such destruction everywhere. But I suppose my question is really how do we broaden that revelation out into like wider consciousness? Because I feel there is an awareness among, I think at their core people do like nature, people want to protect it, but there's such a disconnect. And I feel that disconnect in everything, and it makes it very difficult then to kind of change people's way of viewing things. They see things as weeds and they just want to
tarmac and, you know, whatever else it is. And I suppose I've been interested in the rights of nature. And again, that's something that does make a lot of sense to me. But I guess I'm wondering, considering the world we're in, the society we're in, how do you bring about that change from on any level? I guess.
Thank you so much. I think it's to anchor into yourself, to recognize that the consciousness you have, what you think, how you view the world, is shaping a larger consciousness. You know, so therefore, if that's the only thing, you can't change other people. We can't change other people. You know, that's what we do. We go around trying to change others rather than address it ourselves. Maybe because we haven't had the benefit of revelation, where we've realised, hold on a sec, it's inner. That's where it's coming from, damn it. You know, so we haven't gone out mindlessly and started wrecking first. There's been an inner motivation, and it's built, and it spreads power across the world. We have the same thing within us. And if you start looking at trying to change someone else, it's a trap. So the best demonstration that the inner revelation is working, as you are obviously the inner revelation is waiting to happen, is to, it happens. If you follow those simple steps, those 4 steps, and practice, especially the nature one, practice it relentlessly, just like the capitalists practice relentlessly. Like, look at what the energy that goes into creating the mess. It's immense. They're doing it mindlessly because they're not conscious of what, you know, what's happened. Their minds are, it's gathering momentum because everyone is, you know, younger ones have no idea. I heard on the radio the other day, somebody, a kid who was in the 20s, had never seen a turnip. It was from a farmer saying, I'm going to give up vegetable growing. That's the point. So we have that in us. It doesn't sound like much of an answer, but I promise you, if you practice that, practice every opportunity, you sit on the bus, you have nature everywhere you go. There's an animal. An animal is not a human-centric thing either. It could be a dog, or a domestic animal. Just give your attention there instead of mindlessly looking at the shops going by. Watch that bird. Oh my God, there's a cloud. You know, just touch base with that and practice it over and over, just until it becomes part of who you are. There will become much more, you'll become much more joyful. You will also have, that should it becomes with a health warning, you'll have more greed. There's no question. And, you know, maybe that's why we're turning away from it. It's too hard. I can tell you the number of times I thought it astounds me all the time. But the joy that comes is also there. And you don't fall to bits when you're with your friends. You fall to bits when you're either in the forest or you're seeing something wrecked, another hedge going out, all the dead ash trees, ash. One of my favourite heart trees. Because of climate change, wasn't able to make it. It might, but right now, where I live, it's dead ash trees everywhere. It's very, very painful. But joy will manifest. And people, even it will affect the collective consciousness, there's no question. But you have to be resilient and relentless. You know, gather every minute. Resist the temptation to, oh, I'm tired, switch on soap. Just, like I said, each puddle shows reflection. So grab whatever you can when you see, just take it in, make that connection. Find your own personal hotspot and be with that. Then like I am, calm, they could appear. People will notice on a physical level as well. I said, God, what's your name? Maisie. Maisie. Maisie's, she doesn't look like she's worried about anything. You know, people notice even though they don't realise it. And slowly that, the minute you start bleeding off to helping to change the world, you're losing your power. You're losing that potential that comes from here to connect with what's real. I hope that's helpful. Best of luck. Thank you,
Yes.
Jan, you were very eloquent today in explaining to us in clear words how we all need to change our thinking and our behaviour if we wish to try and address any of the damage that's been done to our environment and our planet and our lives, our families, where we may over the last few hundred years or maybe a couple of millennia. And indeed, you stressed the relentlessness of this, that we can't just do it on a casual basis. We have to do it permanently, relentlessly, stick to our guns. But you also said we have to do it individually. I think I agree with all of these things. The problem I have is knowing how these individual actions will ever come together. Whether you hazard a guess at how many individuals like you or me have to change our thinking and our actions and be relentless about it for us to prevent the planet from becoming uninhabited.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just thinking of Maisie. People who notice there's something different about it. And they might find kind of gravitating around a bit. For example, that when I was about 18 or 20, I knew this couple in Melbourne, Trevor and Steph. And they were 15 years old. And Trevor had something. He had something. And I was very attracted to him. But whatever he has is freeballs. It's freedom. I couldn't have articulated that because I didn't know I was a mess. None of us did. He would cook a meal and he'd just be cooking a meal. He'd just be cooking a meal. And then one time I remember him saying, there's always a gang of young people at their house. And, do you want to come and listen to some music? He said. Oh, yeah. So we went in and turned on Frank Zappa. Obviously before your time, but it's pretty strong stuff. So within no time, we all started talking. And he said, oh, he went and turned it off. Oh, I thought we'd listen to music. You know, so those things, they show out. And people are drawn to that. And again, like I was saying to Maisie, we cannot allow our minds to bleed off in any direction to what the destruction. Will we make it? I'm asked so often. Do you think we'll make it? Do you think we'll be able to turn things around? Because the minute that question comes, there you are again, functioning with your faulty instrument, which has been conditioned by capitalism. You know, if you don't know the answer that someone's asking you, just say, stay with your being present. And we all have that beauty in us, you know, beauty of having a conversation with someone and looking into their face. You can see the whole thing there. It's not just.
But shall we do it individually? Is that enough? Do we not need a critical mass to get beyond the tipping point?
We don't have a critical mass. We just have ourselves. We only have our one precious and wild life. That's all we have. So that's where we work from.
Perhaps I could come in there instead of winding up. I mean, I have to get you back again, Jan, but I'm just hopefully off the top. But the question you raised, and you yourself as well, because what is our theory of change?
What's what?
What is our theory of change? How do we think change happens in cultures and economies and in politics? And there is a tension in a way, because I'm a political scientist, I'm a politician, I'm a political activist.
I still love you.
And no, it's okay. And there, at an extreme level, there's a saying in the more radical environmental movement that ecology without class politics is gardening. Ecology without class politics is gardening. And that actually we need both inner work, as you described, that psychological attunement, but without. Look at how did women win the vote? It wasn't necessarily through changing consciousness for most people. How do we defeat fascism? Similarly. So this is not to diminish anything you've said, but it's almost like it's necessary but insufficient for the change that we need, because as somebody who reads the science quite closely on the planetary crisis, and as an educator for over 35 years, I've now had to put trigger warnings on my modules to warn the young students that I'm teaching to be mindful of their own emotional reaction. And for me, and this is where I think that you can combine what we're talking about with the more overtly political, in the sense of agency and hope. I mean, I see it every year where a lot of young people feel hopeless. And we do have a recognised crisis now, climate anxiety amongst young people. But actually, what's the therapeutic response to that for me is always activism. Now, whether it's inner, and I think in your view, if the redemptive as well as the revelatory, I have to say, is very strong there. But it's about how do we combine those old style political mobilizations that have given us the unfinished journey of gender equality, of racial equality, of class equality, and that it's necessarily insufficient because of the urgency of what we're facing. And it seems to be that we need to find a way of bringing the inner work with but we do need political mobilization. I mean, Extinction Rebellion had this ridiculous notion that if 2.5 or 5% of the people rise up and get arrested, bada bing, bada boom, that the issues didn't work. And I'm more convinced that we need to start linking this, because I see this as a necessary therapeutic recovery for activism. Because I've met too many activists in my career who are burnt out, they're bitter, and they're broken, partly because they weren't taking care of themselves. So it's how do you combine the inner? Well, we are going to need politics, and I have to tell you folks, we're going to need non-violent direct action. I cannot see any way our current economic is going to change without that direct challenge.
I'm arguing against my own question. I'm arguing against myself. I have to disagree with you. I think that Jan was saying that this action and thought has to be individual, cannot be collective, cannot rely on everyone in this room agreeing so that we can go out and storm whatever you storm around here. That it's got to stay within me, and it's got to make a difference within me, not in the, yes, in the wider world, but not by relying on the other dozen people in the room. I'm only confusing the matter by throwing that in, but am I vaguely right there, Jan, in trying to interpret the saying you see, when I asked the question, I wasn't saying should we all stand up and burn the flag and march out into the street, but how many people, if we all did change our thoughts and change our behaviour today, and all of us here, and all of us in Belfast, and all of us in Ireland, how many people would need to be doing that individually before it made a difference to the world? Because some of the things you said earlier did imply that it's not just me that's in trouble, but the whole world. And I think we all have a feeling that maybe the whole world will fire. And how many people have to individually get their act together before we put the fire out? That's true.
I can just take on those.
And yes, I'm sticking with individualism, and while I respect the suffragettes who had to chain themselves to railings and march in big columns to change the law at that time, I don't ever see Joan joining a political party and marching in the column to do that. I think she's more likely to do it through her inner self. The two of you have different points of view on attacking the problem.
Not necessarily antagonistic.
No, I just think to take those two, one with John's, look, it's like the three girls with the placard. Look, it was a very innocent thing to grab, that newspaper cutting. But I love to see them. And I just thought, if we do this work, we all have agreed we have to do this work. And then we go out with our placards, or we face God knows what we face. You're going there with Nagaya in your gut, with this flat calm. As an individual, you're holding it there. You're waiting until that heat leaves. And it doesn't then burn you out. You bring that with you like you're a lifeline into situations. You might think I don't face situations. I do. Mainly I don't these days. But so and for does that that the external work, the three girls with the placards going out and facing you know, being a red rebel and going out and doing the stuff they do, perhaps would be, had this work been done first, had that work become who they actually are, then they can go out. Krishnamurti says, you know, people are always giving out to him because he's dead now, of course, about God, big issue, because he grew up in the Hindu world and they're totally offended that he's not teaching God stuff. So he's saying, look, do this work first and then read your books.
Mhm.
Without this work, there's no point in reading your books. It's going to go nowhere. Now, he was focused on environment, I'm sure. He was one of the first people that I ever heard speak strongly about what's, thank God, if you saw it now, what's going on. But so this work is more important. Finding that, it's essential. It's not that it's essential, especially if you're an activist. Because then when you're going out to do your activism, you are not depleting yourself. And because of that, you're actually energizing the people around you. But you've considered it first. What is the most, the strongest thing I can do here without losing my values and without losing my gut? What's the most powerful thing I can do? And you might find, like the Aboriginal culture, that the Magaya is actually the most important thing that goes through the whole. So bringing that out as an individual, bringing that with you, carrying it with you. It's not in some neurotic way of, you know, it's to, I think by practicing the inner revelation, becoming an inner will develop strength. And it all becomes. So that, and then on Graham's one, I would just say that that's just the mind saying, come with me, it's too hard. Looking at, considering as an inner revelation, what effect that's going to have on others and how many people is depleting your energy. It's a hard thing. We've all become so lazy. You know, it's lethargy. Can't be bothered. Jesus, give me a break. I'd just rather watch the neighbours. Something, you know, you want to watch some sort of, and there's nothing wrong with entertainment. But if you're tired, sleep. You know, if you're tired, sleep. If you're not tired and you want something to unwind, it's so easy. You know,
It's sounding almost Christian about it now. I mean, they do say that Jesus did not care who listened or how many people followed him. He did have a good advertising agency, but still, you know, I mean,
he was probably a revelation. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I'd say, because the work you're doing is so important. And if people view you, particularly young people, viewing John, does he always keep his cool, that guy? You know, like with Trevor, he's following around. It's like, what's he got? And it was what he'd done. He was the one who introduced me to Krishnamurti. You know, and through that, I found that connection with nature, through all of those things. It's extraordinary because this work came up from Russ, the peninsula at our place. There's a peninsula, and there's a big old tree who has a slide there. That's my, you know, my Irish place that I go to. And in the end, after speaking with you and getting that conversation and the invitation to come up here, I had to not go there. Because every time I stepped out onto that peninsula, it's being rewilded. So of course it's mad to express itself. Before it was nothing. It was like shaved until we got that place. And so it's being rewilded and it's there bursting with stuff. So I was there. I'd rush back and I'd write down a little bit more of the next. It was like dictation almost. It was so strong. So if you can build that relationship, and if you do it without nature, it is going to fail. You are going to leave a trail behind you of young people who haven't got a food. They'll be there just, you know, they'll go shake their knees against the wall again and again because you're a great guy. Without that connection that you have in you, it will be expressed in some way. It's just, and it doesn't take time. It's not you have to set aside, okay, initially to find your place, spend time in there. It's just a glance. Oh, So it's an extremely practical thing. And if a lot of the people that you're working on behalf of knew it. Wow.
I'm really sorry we have to bring our conversation to.
We certainly do,
But actually, in summary, I'll just make a few concluding comments. I mean, it's not laziness I fear for the younger generation, it's cynicism. And even worse than pessimism is this kind of faux worldly wideness. Oh, there's nothing we can do, it's all too late. And that's the worst thing that I can see in the young person is to be a cynic.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to be old and cynical after life's tribulations, but it's that sense of hope, which I think your presentation, it's not often in the august citadels of the academy do we get John Spillane, do we get birdsong, do we get these images of nature. There's something in that, and I couldn't agree with you more in terms of the way in which the modern education system is actually less than helpful. We cannot find places in our curriculum unless you make an inordinate effort to bring our students to botanic gardens. So we can teach about saving nature and so on, but actually to bring out students, there's something in that I think we need to rectify, because we are rivet popping the life supporting system of the planet. Deep down, many of us know this, and yet struggling to figure out a way. And you named it in a way. You know, what's unique about your conversation here today is that inner work, but you're also naming capital, a system of for-profit privatization, turning the world into a commodity and so on. So that's it. But to me, I don't see any contradiction between political and what you're talking about. One absolutely complements the other. So can I thank you for your gift of your presence here today, your provocative intervention and your testimony in terms of you bearing witness, which is something that we can all take inspiration from. So can I ask you all online and here in the room to thank Jan.